It's overcast outside and suddenly I look like a vampire who ain't wearing no bronzer. I'm pre-filming several videos today because I have work and I go back to school, so I imagine these are going to be the only videos I post for a while. Also, I look good. Maybe not. Today I'm coming to you with a CramAthon wrap-up. I did very little promo on the CramAthon this year. If you're wondering what happened, it's because I don't even host CramAthon anymore. If you've been on my channel since 2015, you might know CramAthon. It's a readathon that I used to host every December and July-ish time, and you would read all your shortest books just to make sure you're cramming in a bunch of things in a short amount of time. Usually the goal centered around reading graphic novels or children's books or picture books or whatever it may be. I ended up not being able to host this year, and so I passed it on to Dylan the Reader, whose channel I'll link below. He and a bunch of his friends decided to host it. I know off the top of my head Jay also did it. I really can't remember off the top of my head, so everything will be down below. But they hosted it. They did a really great job. Mine was always low-key, but they were doing reading sprints and all this fun stuff. I just did it at my own pace. Ended up reading 7 books, which I think is great. I read 3 graphic novels / mangas, 2 short books, and I finished 1 book on audiobook. So I think I had a pretty good week. First, I read Orange, the second collection by Ichigo Takano. I believe this is a duology, so it's just these 2, then it's done. And this series follows a girl who goes to a school in Japan and has a really close-knit friend group. And then one day, this new boy comes to her town and her school, and they start to become friends with him. However, one day the main character receives a letter from herself in the future saying, "Your friend is going to commit suicide. Here are steps you need to take in order to make his life better, to prevent this from happening so that you're not neglecting his feelings." It's about suicide prevention and awareness. Not only is there the time travel aspect of getting a letter to herself, there's also the entire plot line of this friend who has this dark history that they're trying to unravel and make sure he's talking about so that he doesn't end up killing himself. So obviously, trigger warning for suicide in this book, but even though it is about suicide and something as tragic as depression, it's not a sad book. It's still very lighthearted and cute, and there's angst. It's just honestly a roller coaster. The second volume was as good as the first volume. I really have no complaints for them. I gave this 4.5 stars. The next book I read is called Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This book is a letter written from father to son, the father being the author. The author is a black man living in America. Specifically, it focuses on the history of America and slavery and talks about how to protect yourself and how to protect your body if you're black, because you are a target in our society. And it goes into the history of that and the mindset of people who think they're white, which is the terminology he uses in this book. This felt like being awakened. This was probably the #1 book I've read that was like a bucket of ice water to my face. The way that Coates phrases things and makes analogies out of racial relationships and describes the history of slavery is done in ways that I've never considered before in such groundbreaking words. I can't even describe how often I marked in this and underlined things and just sat back and thought, whoa. It's a National Book Award winner for a reason. It's unlike any reading experience I've had before. I'm gonna find a quote that I can read for you just to demonstrate how powerful this was. Okay, so this is talking about when he was at an interview for a TV show and they were asking him what it's like to live his lifestyle. At the end of the interview, it says the host asked him about hope, and he says, "I knew then that I'd failed, and I remembered that I had expected to fail. But why exactly was I sad? I realized then why it was sad. When the journalist asked me about my body, it was like she was asking me to awaken her from the most gorgeous dream. I've seen that dream all my life. It is perfect houses with nice lawns. It is Memorial Day cookouts, block associations, and driveways. The dream is tree houses and the Cub Scouts. The dream smells like peppermint but tastes like strawberry shortcake. And for so long I've wanted to escape into the dream, to fold my country over my head like a blanket, but this has never been an option because the dream rests on our backs sex, the bedding made from our bodies. So this entire book goes into that concept of the dream and people living in this world where they ignore the violence that America is built upon. And I could talk about it for another 30 minutes. It's easily one of the most memorable books I've ever read. Coates is just so eloquent, and I would love to read anything else he's ever written. Moving onward. So the next book that I finished on audiobook was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I have been avoiding spoilers for this book for 20 years. Every time I saw screenshots of the movie, every time that I was presented with some kind of retelling of Pride and Prejudice, I said no thank you. I want to read the book first and go into it completely blindly. And that's what I did, expecting like, oh, it's gonna be so good, it's gonna be so great. This is one of the very rare books in the world where if you don't go into it with prior knowledge of it or having read a retelling or having seen the movie, it's not gonna be good. There's people that might have read this without that and enjoyed it, but for me, I didn't know who any of the characters were. There were literally like 7 Miss Bennets and Miss Bingleys, and none of them were ever explained. It was so hard to follow. I didn't know who anyone was. I didn't understand what was happening. It was boring. It was just banter about nothing for 150 pages. I literally got like 70 pages into this and just put it down and started crying because I felt stupid. I didn't understand it. I didn't know why people thought it was so good. Everything about it was just so bad. And I know that like if I would have gone into it after watching the movie, maybe having the idea of who these people were and what they stood for would have made it better. So that's why I 100% intend on rereading this someday after having watched the movie or done some kind of research. I ended up just putting this on 2x speed on audiobook and blasting through it. I didn't give it 1 star completely because I feel like some parts I understood, like the hyperbolic discussion about physical beauty or richness. I could see the meaningfulness behind, but then it also kind of set up the book to have that you're not like other girls quality, because Elizabeth is supposed to be this person who doesn't care about her status and doesn't care about her looks. So it's just like I couldn't win. I know a ton of people are a fan of this book and I'm probably not doing it justice just because I should have watched the movie first, so I'm gonna stop talking about it. I gave it 2 stars. I really could not recommend this book if you don't care about it. Yeah, Mr. Darcy was a total letdown, overhyped, wasn't that cute. That's all I'm saying. I can't. Next, I read The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. I finished a story out of this every day so that I could keep it going throughout the week. These are short stories that are more like fairy tales that are set in the Grisha-verse, and they all correspond with all the different countries. And you can assume that the characters from those countries will have had read these growing up or, you know, whatever. These are just gorgeous. They have art along the spines, and I found them really enjoyable. I wouldn't say that they are a necessary addition to the series, like you could totally read the books and not have read this and you'll have missed nothing. But if you like her writing style and you like this sort of fable fairy tale type of writing, I think it is worth the investment for the art and for the stories. They're clever, they're feminist. You read it like I did, just do 1 a day or 1 every few days. It is really enjoyable that way. I enjoyed the first one the most, and then after that each one just got a little bit less exciting for me, so that was kind of a drag, but still I gave it 4 stars. I don't regret reading it, and it's pretty. The next book I read was another graphic novel. It was Sweet Tooth by Jeff Lemire. This is a book that follows a kid who has antlers, and he's like a deer hybrid because it's post-apocalyptic, and it follows a world where he and his father are hiding out in the woods, and he's supposedly a very rare type of child that was born after this whole plague outbreak thing occurred. And his dad has told him his whole life, stay in the woods, don't leave, don't interact with any people. But then one day his dad dies. He has to start surviving by himself, making his own decisions, and figuring out does he want to leave the woods when he has the opportunity. I think this is a really great start to a graphic novel series, which is kind of a summary of how I felt about it. It just felt like too much introduction and not much action. You got a good sense of the characters, you got a good sense of the world, but it seemed very introductory and there was nothing substantial to this book. That being said, I do think it will be a good series and later volumes might be 5 stars, but this by itself just wasn't too exciting. Even though it was very easy to comprehend and it never left me bored or confused, it still just lacked any sort of punch because the plot line stayed kind of stagnant, but based off the ending of this, I'm sure the next volume will be great, and I do intend on picking them up. I gave it 3.5 stars. The next manga I read was Fruits Basket by Natsuki Takaya. Whenever I ask for manga recommendations, everyone says to read this. So I bought it on a whim because I thought, hey, if everyone says it's great, I'll read it. I didn't realize that the people who recommend this are people that read it as a kid and have seen the anime and are really addicted to it, and I'm someone going in blindly, having never read manga, having never watched the anime. So because of that, I thought this book was a total flop. I didn't understand anything. I didn't know who the characters were. Literally, I could not tell you one character's name in this just because no one is fleshed out. The action's a little bit weird. It follows the Chinese zodiac and these boys who can shapeshift. Not boys, there's also girls, but there's people who can shapeshift into all the different animals from the zodiac. It just was so strange. Nothing was explained. It was boring. I almost DNF'd it. It was just kind of a hot mess to me. I didn't understand it. I'm sure people who grew up with it or have seen the anime understand it better and love it. I'm not discounting that it's a good series. I'm just saying, for me, after reading Orange and having that be a magnificent series, this made absolutely no sense to me, and I just don't think it's my cup of tea. So I gave that 1.5 stars. And the final book that I read for CramAthon was a under 200 page book called Every Heart a Doorway. This book is by Seanan McGuire, and it follows this boarding school slash therapy center that's for kids who have found some sort of doorway into another world like Narnia or Alice in Wonderland, and they come back to the normal world and they're now having to deal with the fact that they crave to go back to this magical world that they've escaped to, but they can't. So it's all these kids being kids, they're teenagers, but they're people being rehabilitated back to living life on Earth in this world. So that by itself was just a fascinating concept to me, and the characters were really interesting to get to know. But on top of that, this book actually follows a murder mystery, so it's a little bit of layers stacked on top of each other to add to the intrigue of this book. I thought it was really well done, and I know that the #1 complaint about this book is that it's too short. It's like 170 pages. I agree with that criticism. However, I feel like the plot was well done enough. I just wish there was a little more character development and imagery of the setting. Otherwise, I have no complaints about this book. I thought it was really brilliant. I thought that the representation was great. There was an asexual main character, a transgender side character. I just gave it a big ol' thumbs up. I know this is a series, and I think the ending of this was cool, so I don't know if it's a companion series, if it's a continuation, but I definitely want to check that out because this is one of the most unique plots that I've ever read in a story, ever. And it wasn't predictable at all, so enjoyed that. Okie dokie, well now that all the light is gone and I still have a few more videos to film. Alrighty, I will see you with different wrap-ups later in the future. Goodbye!